Picture this. August 20th, 480 BC. You're a Greek soldier standing in a narrow pass between mountain and sea. For 2 days, you've done the impossible, held back the largest army the world has ever seen. The Persians keep coming, and you keep killing them. The math is simple. They can't get through. Then, as the third dawn breaks, you hear it. Footsteps. Behind you, on the mountain path that was supposed to be guarded. Suddenly, there are Persians in front of you, and Persians coming down from the heights at your back. The bottleneck that made you invincible, it just became your tomb. You watch your king dismiss the Allied forces, knowing exactly what that means. You're not holding the line anymore. You're buying time with your blood. This isn't Hollywood. This isn't 300. This is the Battle of Thermopylae. And what I just described was the single most decisive hour in the entire 3-day battle. The moment when the strongest defensive position in Greece transformed from an unbreakable gate into a killing floor. For 72 hours, King Leonidas and his Greek alliance had done what everyone said was impossible. 7,000 men holding back an invasion force of perhaps 100,000 to 300,000. They'd watched wave after wave of Persian infantry break against their shields. They'd killed Xerxes' own brothers. They'd turned the narrow pass into a graveyard so thick with bodies that the Persians had to clear corpses just to attack again. These men were done with retreating, done with watching their cities burn, done with Persian expansion swallowing Greece piece by piece. This pass, these hot gates, was where they drew the line. But empires don't fall to courage alone. They fall to strategy. And on that third night, while the Greeks slept believing themselves secure, a traitor named Ephialtes was leading an elite Persian unit up a mountain path most Greeks didn't even know existed. What happened in the hour after dawn, when that flanking force emerged, behind the Greek lines, is the story of how the most famous last stand in history became a last stand at all. This is the story of the 1 hour when geometry, betrayal, and inevitability converged to break the unbreakable. In the next 20 minutes, we're going to walk through that final morning step by step, from the moment the Persians began their night march, to the dawn contact that sealed the Greeks' fate, to Leonidas' final terrible decision. Whether you're watching from Athens or Arizona, Singapore, or São Paulo, you're about to witness the hour that proved a simple truth. Even the perfect defense has a fatal flaw. You just need to find it in the dark. Let's go back to the night of August 19th, 480 BC, and watch as Xerxes' solution begins its climb, the unbreakable gate. To understand why that hour shattered everything, you need to understand why Thermopylae worked at all. The pass itself was a geographic accident, a narrow strip of land squeezed between Mount Kallidromos and the Malian Gulf. At its tightest point, maybe 15 meters wide, barely enough room for 2 chariots side by side. The Greeks didn't choose this ground by chance. They chose it because it turned mathematics into murder. The Persian army stretched for miles. Tens of thousands of infantry, cavalry, archers, immortals. On an open field, they'd swallow the Greek force in minutes. But in that narrow throat of rock and sea, numbers meant nothing. You could only fit so many men into the killing zone. And every man who entered faced a wall of bronze shields and iron spear points. The Greeks had reinforced an old Phocian wall across the pass. Nothing spectacular. Crumbling stone, hastily rebuilt. But it didn't need to be a fortress. It just needed to anchor the phalanx, and the phalanx was the real weapon. Here's where it gets brutal. A hoplite phalanx in tight formation is essentially a human meat grinder. Shields lock together. Spears project forward in layers. The men in, front kill. The men behind push. If you're facing this formation in a narrow space, you have exactly two options: die on the spears or get pushed backward into your own troops. The Persians chose both, repeatedly. For 2 days, Xerxes threw everything he had at that wall, wave after wave of infantry. They broke. He sent regional forces from across his empire. They broke. He sent the immortals, his elite 10,000, the best soldiers Persia had ever produced. They broke too. Herodotus tells us Persian officers stood behind their own lines with whips, literally driving men forward into the slaughter. The bodies piled so thick that fresh attackers had to climb over the dead to reach the Greeks. 2 of Xerxes' own brothers died in the fighting. The King of Kings watched from his golden throne as his army bled out against 7,000 men who simply would not move. Think about that. 2 days. The largest invasion force in ancient history. And they couldn't gain a single meter. By the second night, the Greeks had every reason to believe in forever. The pattern was set. The Persians attack. The Persians die. The pass holds. Leonidas rotated his troops to keep them fresh. The Spartans took the heaviest shifts, but Thespians, Thebans, and other allies filled the gaps. The system worked. But 400 meters above them, invisible in the darkness, was the flaw that would kill them all. Stay with me. The night march. The Thermopylae path. Most Greeks didn't know it existed. A goat track, really, winding through oak forests and mountain scrub, climbing the heights of Kallidromos before descending behind the pass. Local shepherds used it. Hunters, maybe. Nobody who mattered. Except now someone who mattered knew exactly where it was. Ephialtes of Malice, a local Greek with local knowledge and a grudge that history has never fully explained. He came to Xerxes with a gift, the path around the unbreakable gate. His name would later become the Greek word for nightmare. He earned it. On the evening of August 19th, Xerxes gave the order. Hydarnes, commander of the immortals, would take a force of elite Persian infantry up the mountain. They would march through the night. By dawn, they would be behind the Greek position. The hammer would meet the anvil. Picture the column forming in the darkness, torches extinguished, voices forbidden, thousands of men moving single file up a track barely wide enough for 2. The route stretched 10 to 12 kilometers through hostile terrain. 8 hours of climbing, minimum. 1 stumble, 1 rock slide, 1 alert Greek scout. And the entire plan dies. They climbed anyway. Here's where it gets strange. Leonidas knew the path existed. He'd stationed 1,000 Phocian soldiers on the heights specifically to guard it. 1,000 men, dedicated sentries. Their one job was to prevent exactly what was happening. And they failed completely. Sometime before dawn, the Phocians heard rustling in the oak forest above them. Leaves crunching. Footsteps multiplying in the darkness. They grabbed their weapons, formed up, and prepared to fight. Arrows flew, a brief skirmish in the pre-dawn black. Then the Phocians made the decision that doomed Greece. Instead of holding the path, instead of dying on that ridge to buy time for a warning, they withdrew to higher ground to defend themselves. They assumed the Persians were coming for them. They assumed wrong. Hydarnes' column barely paused. The path was open. The Persians poured through. Watch what happens next. Runners began sprinting down the mountain toward the Greek camp. Deserters from the Persian side. Greek scouts who'd seen the column passing. The message was simple. They're behind you. They're coming. You have maybe an hour. The geometry that made Thermopylae perfect was about to become the geometry that made it a grave. The decisive hour. Dawn to collapse. First light. August 20th, 480 BC. The sun crests the eastern hills, and Leonidas receives the news that ends everything. Messengers, breathless and terrified, deliver the report. Persian forces on the mountain path. Already past the Phocian guard, descending toward the rear of the pass. The trap is sprung. Megistias the seer examines the morning sacrifices. The entrails tell him what the scouts already confirmed. He looks at Leonidas and speaks 2 words. Death comes. But Leonidas doesn't need prophecy. He needs mathematics. And the mathematics have just turned catastrophic. 7,000 Greeks. 1 narrow pass. The entire defensive strategy depends on a single principle. The enemy can only come from one direction. Phalanx warfare is about facing forward together, shields locked, spears leveled at the threat in front of you. It works because your flanks are protected by the men beside you and the terrain around you. Now imagine that same formation with enemies emerging from behind. The pass that funneled Persians into a kill zone, it now funnels Greeks into a crossfire. The walls that protected their flanks, now they're barriers preventing escape. Every advantage inverts. Every strength becomes weakness. Leonidas gathers his commanders. The conversation is short. There's no time for debate, no time for sentiment. The math is simple and brutal. Everyone dies here, or some escape to fight again. He dismisses the allies. Think about that order. Think about what it cost to give it. For 2 days, these men held the line together, bled together, killed together. Now Leonidas looks at 4,000 of them and says, "Go, live, fight at Salamis, fight at Plataea, win the war we're about to lose." The allied forces withdraw south, Corinthians, Arcadians, Mycenaeans. They march away from the pass, away from their king, carrying the survival of Greece on their shoulders. Who stays? 300 Spartans. They cannot leave. Spartan law forbids retreat, and the religious festival that justified their small number has expired. They came to hold or die. Now they'll die. 700 Thespians, volunteers. Their city lies directly in the Persian path. If Greece falls, Thespia burns. They choose to stand with Sparta. 400 Thebans. The sources argue about whether they stayed willingly or as hostages. It doesn't matter now. They're here. Roughly 1,400 men against an empire closing from both directions. This wasn't a suicide pact. Leonidas wasn't throwing lives away for glory. Every minute these men held bought the retreating Greeks another kilometer of safety. Every Persian who died in the pass was 1 fewer Persian at Salamis. This was time, purchased in blood, spent on survival. The hour begins. From the front, the main Persian army launches its assault. Xerxes knows the flanking force is descending. He knows the Greeks know. The only question now is how long they'll last. From the rear, Hydarnes' column emerges from the mountain trails. They're tired from the night march, but ready. They form up and advance toward the back of the Greek position. The pass stops working. Leonidas makes a decision that surprises the Persians. He advances. Instead of waiting at the wall to be surrounded, he pushes forward into the wider part of the pass, trying to kill as many Persians as possible before the jaws close completely. The fighting here is different from the first 2 days. This isn't disciplined defense. This is slaughter mathematics. Kill more than you lose. Make them pay for every body. The Greeks crash into the Persian front lines with something beyond courage, desperation, fury, the knowledge that time itself is the only victory left. Spears shatter against shields and armor. The Greeks fight with broken shafts. Spears gone, they draw swords. Swords break or fall. They use hands and teeth. Herodotus doesn't exaggerate this for drama. He reports it as fact. Men fighting with their bare hands because every weapon they carried is embedded in Persian flesh. Stay with me. This is where it breaks. Leonidas falls. The king of Sparta dies in the thick of the fighting. No grand speech, no cinematic final moment. He's in the front ranks where he's been for 3 days, and then he's down. 1 more body in a pass, already carpeted with corpses. But Spartans don't leave their kings. 4 times, the remaining Spartans charge into the Persian mass to recover Leonidas's body. 4 times, they drag it back toward their own lines. The fighting around the fallen king becomes the most savage of the entire battle. Greeks killing to protect the corpse, Persians killing to claim it. The Greeks win the body, they lose the battle, the formation collapses. Without Leonidas, without hope, the surviving Greeks withdraw to a small hill behind the wall. The Kolonos, a bump of earth barely worth naming. Here, the last defenders make their final stand. They're surrounded completely now. Persians on every side. The pass is no longer a defensive position, it's an execution ground. Watch what happens next. Xerxes doesn't send more infantry to die on Greek spears. He's learned that lesson. Instead, he pulls his men back and gives a single order. Archers, thousands of Persian bowmen ring the hill. They draw, they loose, they draw again. The Greeks die under a storm of arrows so thick it darkens the morning sun. No more heroic combat. No more spear against spear. Just wave after wave of bronze-tipped shafts falling on men who have nowhere to run and no way to fight back. The last Spartan falls. The last Thespian falls. The pass belongs to Persia. Time elapsed from dawn contact to final silence. Roughly 1 hour, 1 hour to break the unbreakable. Xerxes walks through the pass. His servants clear a path through the bodies. Greek and Persian tangled together, spears still embedded, hands still clutching throats. The King of Kings steps over the men who held him for 3 days and stops at a corpse his soldiers have identified. Leonidas. What happens next tells you everything about what this battle cost. Persian, tradition honored worthy enemies. A dead king, even an enemy king, deserved respect. Xerxes had shown such respect before. He would show it again. Not here. He orders Leonidas's head severed from his body. He orders it mounted on a pike. He orders it displayed for the army to see. This isn't strategy. This is rage. Pure imperial fury at a man who made the Lord of Asia bleed for 72 hours in a worthless mountain pass. Xerxes won. He has the pass. He has Greece laid open before him. And he's still angry. Think about that. Why this hour mattered. The pass falls. The Spartans die. Xerxes marches south. So what? What did that hour actually buy? Everything. The Greek fleet at Artemisium receives word that Thermopylae has fallen. They don't panic. They don't scatter. They withdraw in good order to Salamis, preserving every ship for the battle that matters. Athens evacuates. The entire city. Women, children, elderly, slaves, everyone. They board ships and flee to nearby islands. When Xerxes arrives, he finds empty streets. He burns the temples. He levels the Acropolis. He destroys a city that no longer contains anyone who matters. The Greek alliance holds. This is the miracle nobody talks about. A coalition of city-states that had been rivals for centuries, that had fought each other more often than they'd cooperated, watches its forward defense annihilated, and doesn't collapse into blame and betrayal. They grieve. They regroup. They prepare. 1 month later, Salamis. The Persian fleet, swollen with confidence, sails into a narrow strait where their numbers mean nothing. The Greeks are waiting. In a single day, they shatter Xerxes' naval power so completely that he flees back to Asia, leaving his army behind. 1 year later, Plataea. The combined Greek forces meet the Persian army Xerxes abandoned. It's not close. The invasion ends in Persian bodies stacked across the battlefield. Here's where it gets clear. None of that happens without Thermopylae. None of that happens without the 3 days Leonidas bought. None of that happens without the hour when 1,400 men chose to die slowly instead of quickly, trading their lives minute by minute so that runners could reach the fleet, so that ships could be launched, so that a civilization could survive. The hour didn't save the pass. The hour saved Greece. Put yourself on Xerxes' throne for a moment. You command the largest army ever assembled. You've crushed every enemy you've faced. You arrive at a narrow pass held by a handful of Greeks, and it takes you 3 days, 3 days to break through. You lose tens of thousands of men. You lose brothers. You lose prestige. And when you finally march through, you discover that every city ahead of you is empty. Every fleet has repositioned. Every army is regrouping. You won the battle. You're losing the war. That's what the hour cost. Not just bodies, time. The one resource even the King of Kings couldn't manufacture. The legacy. 25 centuries later, we still tell this story. Not because the Greeks won at Thermopylae. They didn't. Not because 300 Spartans defeated an empire. They didn't. We tell it because of what they proved in that final hour. The perfect defense has a flaw. There's always a path in the dark, a traitor with knowledge, an enemy with patience. Geometry fails, walls fall, the unbreakable breaks. But the perfect defense doesn't need to last forever. It just needs to last long enough. Leonidas knew, in that dawn moment, exactly what was coming. He'd done everything right, held for 2 days, killed thousands. And still the flaw was there. A goat track in the mountains, a local man with a grudge, an empire willing to climb through the night to find the seam. He couldn't stop it, so he bought time instead. The epitaph they carved at Thermopylae says it simply, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their laws we lie. No glory, no boasting, just duty, fulfilled to the last breath." The Persians broke through in 1 hour. But that 1 hour, when geometry, betrayal, and inevitability converged to break the unbreakable, cost them an empire. Xerxes marched south through the pass, stepping over the bodies of men who'd held him for 3 days. He marched toward an Athens that was empty, toward a fleet that was ready, toward a Greece that had used every minute he'd paid for in blood. He marched toward his own defeat. The sun sets on the hot gates. The pass is silent now. Persian soldiers strip the dead, collect the weapons, clear the road for the army that will follow. On a small hill behind the ruined wall, 1,400 bodies cool in the evening air. Spartans, Thespians, Thebans, men who saw the trap close and chose to stay inside it. Somewhere to the south, Greek ships cut through darkening waters, carrying news of the fall and orders for what comes next. The pass is open. The war has just begun. If you want more deep dives into the battles that shaped history, subscribe and hit the bell. Next time, we're covering the naval battle that followed Thermopylae, Salamis, where the Greeks turned Xerxes' numerical advantage into a death trap. Until then, remember, sometimes losing the battle at the right time is how you win the war.